Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. Today we have a special guest. In fact, the first person that I ever collaborated with, ever, on the show. I don't even remember how that happened, but he'll tell you about that very soon. His name is David Getzen, a building designer and an art historian who runs a YouTube channel, will be in the show description, and also runs his business with the site livingprocess.net. He'll design you stuff, basically. A very great guy. So, David, how did we meet?
Oh, it was it was either exactly before or exactly after the beginning of the Trump administration. I was in Lima. I was listening to a bunch of podcasts. I was listening to your podcast, and my podcast at the time, my new content's on YouTube, but my old podcast, A History of Architecture, which I'd been doing bi-weekly, I was in the middle of going over Kazimir Malevich.
Oh, yeah.
And I loved your work that you were doing with history generally. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I'll reach out and let him know that I'm talking about this, because with Kandinsky, there was such, and maybe we'll get into this today, there was such an amazing creative explosion around 1910, 1912-ish, which had something to do culturally with the greater Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, Russian frontier environment. And, Malevich's sculptures and paintings were part of that, really inventing what we call abstract art. I reached out to you about that, and we kind of had a brief conversation, and then we did our various things for several years, and then I reconnected with you, and we've been having some interesting interactions on Twitter and so forth.
I just remember this conversation because art history, obviously I've studied that in university, but it's not exactly my specialty. So I remember in that episode, that was one of the hardest researched episodes I've done, because I had to re-study and memorize all these things that I had, well, to be frank, at that time, not that much of an idea about, but I tried my best. Right now I'm a bit more educated and well-traveled too. But this is a breather episode, as you can understand, because it's gonna get rough pretty soon with the dam explosion that happened today, and I'm also in between writing articles for Foreign Policy magazine. But today I just wanted to have David on so we can maybe talk some high art on this show as well, and architecture in particular. To you who are regular listeners, this won't be a surprise that we touch various subjects, but to new people, might be a bit confusing. I remember when I tweeted some things and someone said that they've been going through some episodes and I look like a person with a bunch of red flags, because how can we do all these weird subject matters? But we do. But talking about architecture in Riga, that's the specialty thing. We have two famous things happening here, as far as I know. We have Mr. Rastrelli, and then we have our Art Nouveau. And Rastrelli is kind of more widely known. He has also done the Winter Palace and also the Maria Palace in Kiev. But I want to talk about Art Nouveau, because I live in an Art Nouveau building. Not a very fancy one, but still built in, I think, 1904. Yes. And in Riga, well, we have a whole district dedicated to that. We have about hundreds of them. I'm looking at this. 250 from Pekshans. I'm just not going to go through all of these architects, but it's the huge concentration of Art Nouveau here, way larger than anywhere else. This is what we're known for. One of the most famous architects that we had here was Mikhail Eisenstein, the dad of Sergei Eisenstein, by the way. Just thinking about how this actually spread here. As far as I know, interestingly enough, Art Nouveau got popular here after the Napoleonic Wars, when we demolished our city walls and tried to expand outwards. How's Art Nouveau doing elsewhere? Because again, the claims that we have the most of it is what we get taught in school, but it might as well not be exactly correct, knowing our educational system.
That may or may not be. It's one of those things. It's like in the United States where they have arguments over who has more lakes, Minnesota or Wisconsin. It depends on how you measure it. It depends on what you define Art Nouveau as. But there are many. One of the great things about Art Nouveau is that it tends to be like lemon trees growing in different areas. They're all lemons, but they're going to have special different qualities. And I've been so glad to have you mention this, because I've been taking a look at some of this Art Nouveau stuff, and I'm looking at some images right now. And it does look, to my eye, there are different branches, different subspecies, you could say, of Art Nouveau. And this Art Nouveau seems less like the Belgian French Art Nouveau, which is guys like architects like Horta, and more like the type of stuff that you might see in Prague, or the stuff out of Munich in the what they call the Munich Jugendstil. And
Yeah, that's how. By the way, it's called in Riga here, in Latvian as well. We call it Jugendstils.
okay. No, that's very telling that they would use the German word instead of the Belgian appellation for it. But Art Nouveau, I think Art Nouveau is a really, really fascinating thing. And whenever
Oh, by the way, if you're looking up some buildings in Riga, check out Albert Street, like Albert Street in Riga. That's the thing which Mikhail Eisenstein built. He built the whole it's a short street, and he built all the buildings there, and they look like a cake. All of them.
Yeah, the wedding cake. And that's something that often gets also associated with Vienna. That you had the Schlagsahne-Stil, the whipped cream style with a kind of frothiness of the ornament. And the high modernist architects, sometimes you'll have generations of art and generations typically where the younger siblings get embarrassed by what the older siblings did. And so they tended to like very, very straight, very plain, very simple things after this in the modern era. And Art Nouveau for a while got kind of a bad name because of this. I love Art Nouveau, and I think there's good reason why it is so enduring, and I think it says something. You had mentioned this as something that was interesting to you right before we started, and I think there's something meaningful to it, that there tends to be, even to a point of frustration that you were talking about, there tends to be a persistent fascination with this style and this time period, and I think it touches a cultural nerve. I think it even touches a spiritual nerve that we can get into. But the whole idea of the cities being, like the walls being demolished, this was a trend that happened. Paris got Haussmannized. That was earlier. That was before Art Nouveau happened. But when this was happening in Vienna, a little bit later on than Paris got kind of rebuilt and modernized, and it was happening with, I think Riga, you were saying, that even though some of the earlier stuff was neoclassical, as the city continued to be filled in over decades, Rome wasn't built in a day. You don't rebuild an urban planning city overnight. But as these new spaces of the torn down city walls were being filled in, as it got through to the 1890s, there was something where the industrial capacity, the new industrial capacities, caught up with people's imaginations and people's desire for something new and different. And a really fantastic, it was a lecture that was made an article in either 1910 or 1911 called Wo stehen wir? Where do we stand? The German architect and historian, really the godfather, I would say, of the Bauhaus, Hermann Matthias, that he wrote this. He talked about, well, where do we go from here with architecture and design in this new 20th century? He was giving the lecture, I think, in 1910. And he said that the year 1895 or 6 was this breaking out of a new sense of form, and that Art Nouveau appeared, he said, as a Wechselbalg, which is a fantastic German word that usually isn't translated well. It means changeling. It means like a fairy that's becoming a butterfly, a metamorphosis. But then after a while, after a few years, it shook off its molting feathers and became this new type of thing again. And he was seeing already how Art Nouveau very quickly, it was a very fast art style, but you can see almost like a historical snapshot camera in certain neighborhoods, in certain cities, scattered mostly throughout Europe, not so much in the United States, because the United States was a combination of more conservative and more impatient, and like so progressive as to be impatient and so conservative as to not accept the new stuff. There's not all that much Art Nouveau in the States, but there's some. You could say that someone like Louis Sullivan or Frank Lloyd Wright is our own distinct American version of that, and I think that's fair. But you'll have these glorious neighborhoods throughout Europe that has this, it captures that time in the 1890s, when people felt that there was this rebirth of poetry. There was Baudelaire and Rimbaud in France. People could analogize it to the 60s a little bit, that you had a youth movement. It was called Jugendstil, the youth style. The idea that women were more liberated. The big thing is that they would ride bicycles and play soccer back then. That was radical.
Thing here, I read that when these buildings were being built, they were built as apartment houses for the wealthy, and the wealthy tended to be young merchant class, and the old money hated Art Nouveau back in the day when it was built, at least here in Latvia. And in a sense, as the time when this is created, we have our national awakening. Latvians become aware of themselves as a nation. So a lot of this is tied with our own national romanticism here in Latvia.
That's very interesting. And I think that's very important as well.
This sort of formed this. This is why Latvia loves our Art Nouveau, because it represented the fact that old Baltic German elites had been sitting there and dominating us, and now we're awakening. And like you said, this movement and this new style and everything, we sort of embraced it as one of the elements that brought us all together. We have a very specific, as I learned here, because I again had to study about this, we have a sort of Latvian architects who tried to draw some inspiration from our traditional pagan era buildings, and it was sort of a bit more heavy than the other styles, and there was special attention to these structural elements, meet lintels and greater ends. Those things are the most kind of focused on in this.
Ah, the lintels, yes, and the spandrels. I'm seeing in the images online you have spandrels and mullions on the facade of a building. That's a good element to pay attention to for people, especially if you're walking around a city like Chicago or stuff with older skyscrapers. You'll see mullions are a vertical element that usually runs between windows, and spandrels is the element that connects between the two. And then lintels are like something that a flat bit that goes over a door or over a window opening. And so if those being heavily emphasized, I suppose would be characteristic.
Yes, that is how it works. And well, another thing which this Art Nouveau has done for our nation is that, like, Tallinn never demolished its city walls at that time. So they have this old town, and surrounding it this Soviet stuff, which is like blockhouses and everything. Riga was always bigger. And Vilnius has Baroque buildings, a lot of them. But because Riga was so full with Art Nouveau in all the Soviet movies, we've been Paris, we've been Vienna, we've been London too in the old town. They always used Riga to represent every other European city that you ever needed. So that's why we also had a lot of Soviet film industry coming here.
Well, it makes sense. It's, and they often use different cities. If I remember correctly, filming Amadeus, they didn't film it in Vienna because Vienna had changed too much, and they filmed it in Prague, I think. And so I guess you get a similar. It's fantastic that people can enjoy such amazing intact architecture. And just for my clarification, and also maybe for folks listening, in the 1880s and the 1890s and 1901 and 02, what was the political status? Was Latvia part of the Russian Empire? Germany was real close back then.
Yeah, we were a part of the Russian Empire, but at that point we still had a huge, very powerful minority of Baltic German nobles. Mm-hmm. Because Livonia, at that point, Latvia and Estonia together, was a united province, but with huge autonomy, because Germans had arrived during the Crusades and they stayed throughout up until 1939 when Hitler called them all back. But we had a lot of them here. We have a lot of Germanic influences here in Latvia and Estonia because of this. We're a province of the Russian Empire, but we have a very strong autonomy here.
Yeah, see, and that's, again, this was, my own, family history is something that you can probably decode infinitely, but my mom's side is a lot clearer than my dad's side, but without getting lost in the weeds, my dad's side goes back to, as far as we know, Mecklenburg, which is northeastern Germany, and then gets blurrier before that.
Interestingly enough, as a lot of my listeners are also fans of Paradox interactive grand strategy games, they know where Mecklenburg is. Right. I at least know them because that's a playable nation in Europa Universalis 4, which I prefer. So,
that's funny.
It's next to Lübeck, basically.
That's right. Well, yeah, Lübeck being the chief of the Hanseatic cities, which was the old economic and cultural constellation there, and that's why. Now, my last name, Getzin, Getzen, not like Getzen, the people who made the trumpets, who come from further east, but there are even Getzin Getzens. If you look at the Ellis Island, that through the miracle of digitization you can get digitally, is quite a lot of Getzens with an IN came out of Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, it makes sense.
And I don't know if there are any of them there or not.
Well, remember that parts of Ukraine also were part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
That's correct.
For a while. So there might be a bunch of mixing. back to the architecture thing. I want to touch a thing that we spoke about before we started recording, because I live in one of these Art Nouveau buildings of the National Romantism style. It's less like a cake, but it has a lot of decorative elements everywhere. And this Art Nouveau place is where I grew up. And I was walking down there, and if you look at the time period, and you look at, again, popular culture, there's this specific genre called steampunk. And there's a lot of video games like Dishonored, right, and Dishonored Arcanum of Steamworks Magic Obscure. A lot of culture going on in this sort of late 19th century, early 20th century. Well, if you are highly educated, you can maybe think about La Belle Époque, that era, or fin de siècle, the same thing, really, except different attitudes. We add fantasy elements to it. But if you look at this, they only copy Victorian England. They only copy that one specific thing that was in England, which doesn't have a lot of pretty stuff. Even if they portray some sort of realistic cities, it's always London. It's very British centered. I, for example, would encourage people who, and again, a bunch of people who develop video games are listening to this show. If you want to develop a steampunk-ish genre game, I highly recommend you also Google up Albertville and maybe make something like that, or look at the center of Vienna, which is just beautiful. I love that city. And just maybe stop making every fantasy city set in this sort of time period looking like just London or Liverpool. That would kind of be interesting.
I would agree. I think they should do that, certainly. And another thing is that they're completely, if they restrict themselves to London steampunk and are accurate about it, they're going to completely miss on Art Nouveau entirely, because for whatever reason,
yes,
London never did Art Nouveau. Again, it's that conservative plus impatient progressive combination that all us Yankees in the United States tended to echo a little bit. Scotland had a smidge of Art Nouveau with the very interesting, unique contributions of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, who really anticipated more of the strict rectilinear straight edge stuff of the modern era with his really beautiful things in the Glasgow Art School. But if you're going to do 1890s and things, man, they should look here. If any graphic designers are out there, you may already know this, but look up Alphonse Mucha and Peter Behrens and look up their graphic design and just try to not be totally inspired by the way those two guys do women's hair. Go from there, right?
Yeah, that's nice because, well, that's the thing. Art Nouveau it's a style, but all the buildings look so different, and it's really interesting to go through them. And that's a thing that tourists also say when they come to places. And I think it's another thing. You only learn appreciation for architecture, at least much more of it, when you travel a bit, because it's always interesting to look at all the various different buildings. And you might maybe dislike me for that, I really enjoy how Boston looks. I somehow enjoy this colonial style churches, that stuff.
I love Boston. I went to graduate school in the Boston area, and I spent some good years there. I think at least 4 years there. And Boston is fantastic, and Boston has different styles.
They also have brutalism, which is sadly that, what was this? I think it was the town hall, city hall.
It's called Government Center, and it's. Yeah, Government Center is they tore down and they blitzed an entire neighborhood. The United States didn't get bombs to destroy its downtown, so we just did it on purpose for some reason. Yeah, but
the issue is I've also seen good brutalism where the concrete comes through.
It's possible. Yeah,
it is possible to do that. Yes, but that building is not a good example of brutalism. Even at least,
it's terrible.
At least to my appreciation.
But the good thing about Boston is you go a short walk away up to Beacon Hill.
Oh yeah,
some of the oldest amazing neighborhoods in the United States. That's where some of my ancestors lived way back in the 1630s, around there. And yeah, Boston is amazing. And some of the Art Nouveau with stuff from the 1880s and the 1890s with Richardson, the Richardson Romanesque, where you have these huge arches in the library. That's great. Now, Boston is fantastic.
I've walked the Freedom Trail too, by the way, in full. I have the medal-y thing for it.
Oh, the whole thing? Wow.
Yeah, we walked it and went on the USS Constitution as well. That seemed to be an interesting thing to do. There's one city whose architecture or in general city that I did not like being in. The only one from all the foreign places where I can honestly state that I could never imagine myself living there at all, and that was Los Angeles. Oh... It's warm. It's warm.
I don't live in Los Angeles. I live in LA County, and I do not live in Los Angeles. It's a whole thing. Go ahead, but you can tell me.
Great. I don't know how this functions. It's just that the endless suburbia is to me a nightmare.
Not well is how most of it functions. The thing about it, I never thought I would be living in LA County. When COVID hit, I relocated the business to Pasadena. just out of a surprise and out of circumstance. I'm very glad I did for many reasons. The thing about LA County is that the landscape is a lot like Spain or Italy, and it's fantastic. And they originally had these little tiny communities that, like, that type of landscape makes it like central or southern Italy, where you have these small, little, tightly focused communities that are connected by short distances. And they were originally connected all by streetcars. The layout of LA was made with and for streetcars. And in the 1950s, even though the citizens of LA literally protested against it, and the companies, the car companies and the Firestone tire companies were actually convicted in criminal court of conspiracy, they tore up the streetcars and built the freeways all over the place. But there are little cores. The thing is, the places in LA County people pay a lot of attention to and that are famous, I don't like them that much. But that whole culture is changing because people no longer come here to be famous, which I think is a big relief. They make movies all over the place now, so it's less of a big deal. The whole thing's changing, and I think it's positive. But there's people need lots of houses, and I help people build houses, and that's why I'm here. But you get this endless suburban yuck through most of it, but then you get these tight little focused village type places like South Pasadena, Montrose. Let me know if you're ever coming here, and I'll point out some of the nice parts. But oh yes, Los Angeles is a good example of how to have things that can be improved.
I was there in 2019 February, I think, and at that point I was there for a week. And out of all the times in the year, it actually rained twice. It was interesting.
That's been happening more often. I swear, with this whatever climate change might be hitting us, it's like we're shoved down halfway to San Diego. It has been raining more often, which has good parts.
Hello there, and thanks for listening to another episode of The Eastern Border. Dear Patreons, thank you more than ever for supporting our show. Your donations are crucial to keep us going, and right now all of your money is going to securing good information for you and to fund Christoph's actual real-life mission to Ukraine to report to you live about the war that is going on there. Also, we would like to use this opportunity to urge you to donate to other organizations that are helping people escape Ukraine safely and to defend the country for those who decide to stay on the ground. One such organization we would like to highlight is the Defending Ukraine Together Come Back Alive movement. Launched in 2014, the Come Back Alive became the biggest organization providing support to the armed forces of Ukraine. You can donate directly from their webpage, comebackalive.in.ua. Remember that no donation is too small. In this situation, every dollar matters, every cent matters. If you're uncomfortable with giving money to war, they do have a position on their website that they are providing Ukrainian army with laptops, lights, photo equipment, cables, and is not purely military. Perhaps that might change your mind, but remember you can also donate to strictly humanitarian organizations such as the Red Cross and others that are helping people escape Ukraine safely. Please also keep following us on social media for all of your latest updates on Eastern Border on places like Twitter and Facebook. Keep listening, keep yourself informed. That's all from me now. See you online.
Interesting enough, talking about like our old town doesn't have that many very old buildings in it because Riga always prided itself on being a very rich city. Basically, Latvia is 2 million people, out of which about 1 million lives in Riga. And the Baltics altogether has a population of 6 million, and Riga is by far the largest city there. So we always prided ourselves with building the new and fancy stuff. And then one thing that I have to say thank you to the Soviet government for, which is a rare occasion here, but our leader at the time when the Soviets arrived, Karl Ulmanis, who's kind of like our founding father, but he also was an authoritarian leader, but it's a whole mess. We still kind of like him. He didn't kill anyone, so that's good. He panically and frantically hated all the historical German architecture, as he called it, because that represented our 700 years of living under the Germans, their nobility class. So he intended to demolish all of our old town, just down, and replace it with neoclassicism. And at that point, yeah, because that was 1930s. So now you have a ridiculously ugly and huge national radio building where ancient blocks used to be. So
they didn't even have the odd luck to replace it with the tasteful Stalinist Art Deco. Stalin was horrible, but he had good taste in architecture. You can.
Well, see, sadly, no. Like that was before the Soviets. That was our authoritarian leader before the Soviets. So the Soviets come in.
Oh, I see.
So that's why we have our old town.
Oh, of course. Oh, you guys were. I should know. You guys were independent. That's right.
Yes. And then interesting thing happens. One thing that the Soviets did, however, we have a single, really kind of interesting building, which looks exactly like in Warsaw, their big cultural palace thing in the center, which they call the Big Ugly Building, by the way, in Warsaw. And we have a smaller copy here in Riga. But Soviets had a stupid tendency, though. They sometimes built some interesting things. However, for the most part, they did not care about how the whole district looked, how the street looked at all. They just, you bomb a building and it has to be demolished in the historical center of Riga. No matter. Let's put a Khrushchevka there. It looks like a gray box, totally not depressing at all. And interestingly enough, while I was researching this, I'm very happy to live in an Art Nouveau like that era building. Because there's a massive difference between this, and this is an interesting fact that I haven't ever mentioned on the show. Art Nouveau buildings, all the buildings built up to the start of the Soviet era, we have roofs for our rooms inside that are 3 meters tall. So we have like 3 meters from ground to ceiling. Soviets lowered it to 2 meters.
Oh, so you have. Oh, yeah, nice.
And I can tell you, I was growing up in one of these older buildings with a higher ceiling and all the kind of decorations up there. And then when you have to move in and live for a while in one of those Khrushchevkas with a 2 meter ceiling, it really feels like you're being boxed in. And it's hard to explain this, but
and you are literally.
It might not. You might, like normal people on average don't think about this, but your living space really affects your productivity and everything, how you function. If you live in a nice looking building that is actually, pretty from the outside, you'll also be more productive. Definitely. It directly impacts your happiness too, which is why I'm happy that I can,
I think this is absolutely connected. A guy that I greatly admire, that I had the great opportunity and honor to meet and work with some time, a little bit before his recent passing. I first met with him in 2013. Christopher Alexander, a famous enough guy, he actually was born on the outskirts of Vienna, and his family left because of the Anschluss, and then he ended up living in England and growing up in England, and then being a professor at Berkeley and a practicing architect. And one thing that he wrote of is that obviously it does affect our lives. And even it affects your life, even if you don't know it, just like noises around you would affect you, even if you're not consciously aware of it. And it affects some people more than others. But he said that it affects people about as much as like getting enough vitamin C or not. That was, yeah. And I think that's a pretty spot on analogy.
Yeah, that makes sense. This also plays a part in our culture and our way of thought. There's a thought experiment about how we even define things and how we name them. Like an example of this would be if you for example look at a lot of our languages in Europe have genders, feminine and masculine. If you are up in the north, then the sun will always be of the feminine gender because she's the nice caretaker. And if you go down south, then sun becomes a man because she's the angry burner of things. That's a thing. And another one of the things that really explains this is the standard thing is to ask people what do they think of if you ask them to think of a bridge. What kind of bridge comes to your head first? And depending on where you live and depending on everything surrounding you, that will change. And bridge has a lot of elements into it. Bridge is an interesting thing to ask people to think about. And bridges, in this sense, they show, and this whole sort of way how you represent the bridge in your head tells you a lot about whether or not your culture is sort of more aggressive, more imperial, like a lot of history stuff.
That's a fun experiment. You would think, because I did that experiment on myself, and I'm curious how it came out with you, but of course it's like saying don't think of the pink elephant. You're participating in the experiment no matter what.
My bridge that is the default bridge in my head is, and you can Google it up there, listeners, and you as well, is the Riga Railroad Bridge. That's it's made from steel with the arcs, and it's built in the 1920s, I think, maybe earlier. I don't exactly know, but a Riga Railroad Bridge is what comes to my mind when I think of the most default bridge in my head.
Oh, that's a beautiful one. Yeah, that's a beautiful kind of beautiful industrial, and just describing it for people who might Google it later, that it's like several arch spans with arch truss suspension. It's kind of unique. And If now my reaction, you'd think if I was an American, I'd be thinking of the Brooklyn Bridge, and I might even think of that of myself, but that's not what my brain did. My brain and my instinct. I'm not sure what this says about me. I thought of a bridge maybe 700 or 800 feet long, not very long, and made out of limestone over a river. One of those.
Oh, kind of like the famous bridge in Prague, right? The limestone. I'm gonna have to Google limestone. I'm not exactly sure how you spell in Latvian, but it looks like one of those walking bridges. I think maybe.
Yes, it would be a pedestrian bridge, and it would be like horse carts and feet and bicycles.
Oh yeah, yeah. Then definitely, in my mind, that associates with the Karl Bridge. I think that's how it's called in Prague.
Ah.
Or Charles Bridge, Karl Bridge, Prague. Yes, that's what I saw in my head when you spoke about this.
And there are plenty of bridges like that, probably in England too, and also New England in the United States.
Yeah, that's the thing. Bridge in this case is an interesting example because we use them all the time, but that's one of the things that it's not an everyday household object,
right?
Yet it's common enough so that we use them constantly. If we ask someone to think of a spoon, they'll probably think of something very, very aluminium spoon. Default doesn't change. But bridges are very interesting for thought experiments like that. And now we have ensured that both your watchers and my listeners are now thinking about bridges in their head. Amazing.
Yes, bridges and spoons.
Bridges and spoons.
They're related. You could get a tourist commemorative spoon that has a picture of a bridge.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. We certainly don't have a picture of that. The most interesting piece of architecture, besides Albert Street, like from interesting in the historical sense, in an architectural way as well. We're used to it so much that we don't know why tourists go there, but there is Riga Central Market. It's built in hangars-ish. The hangars are made from, as far as I know, there are two possibilities. Either those are Zeppelin parts, like the flying dirigible things, or they were hangars for such and then got repurposed once we figured out after Hindenburg that maybe that is not the future of transportation.
Oh, I'm looking. But it should have been, man. The Zeppelins.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm looking at this right now. These are beautiful. Riga Central Market. There are three of them together, and they look like.
There's another fourth one, like next to
there
it.
is. Oh, okay.
But yeah, they are
the photo
sort of either parts of Zeppelins or Zeppelin hangars, but that's how they made this. And then this architectural thing this is what you want to see there. For example, talking about America again. When I visited New York, I was starting to think that maybe people who grew up in New York, I think that for them, they must think that the sky is a square box as well. Because in Riga, we do not have skyscrapers on this side of the river to preserve the skyline. Skyline is very important for us. But pretty weird to walk there. One thing, though, by the way, again, how architecture impacts our thought and everything. Berlin. Have you been to Berlin? I'm pretty sure you have.
I used to live there. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Berlin, for unknown reasons, when you go to the blocks near the Brandenburger Tor, there, it gets depressing. I mean, the buildings are massive and tall, and kind of growing up in a place where I've been surrounded by Art Nouveau constantly. Walking there feels like it puts you. It makes you feel small.
Do you mean the new ones? Do you mean the new ones are on Potsdamer Platz?
Yeah, the ones where because the walk space is quite tiny, and then there are these huge buildings, and they're wide as well.
They were just all of that was a building site when I was living there. I studied there and I visited there in 2008, and I didn't want to go there to that exact spot. Around the Brandenburger Tor itself is still at least somewhat preserved. That was the old diplomatic area that began, like the whole point of that gate being the way it was to be the processional, beautiful, like if you were going to the palace to do government stuff, they wanted to show how nice Berlin and Germany was, and so you had that gate and the beautiful, even it's even emotional for Germans. The Unter den Linden to have the linden trees along that, and that's still. And again, talking about limestone, that's kind of golden buff colored limestone buildings was traditional, and then you had this neoclassical stuff, some of it built by Schinkel along there. That I love. I'm not a huge fan of this glass-skinned Pomo stuff sticking up all over the place and Frank Gehry's stuff in Potsdamer Platz. That was a bit of the kind of tech boomy things I know what you mean by that in Berlin. When I lived there, I was a latter-day Aussie. I lived in Rosa Luxemburg Platz, which was on the east side. I lived in the part in the east where they still have the streetcars, and in the comedy clubs that I would go to, they would do routines where they tell Aussie and Vessi jokes. Still.
Yeah, it makes sense because, for example, Berlin is interesting in the sense that you can't. Of course, if I asked my German teacher at school where's the city center of Berlin, as she's an Eastern person, she'd say Alexanderplatz.
Yeah.
But that's by no means the center of Berlin. Berlin is the one city on planet Earth where you can't really declare where is downtown city center and where it isn't.
I think that's true.
Because there were two, then they mixed up. That was interesting. Another thing, how political decisions in history changes your living space. The same, by the way, with France, if you think about it. France used to have like these very narrow streets and closed buildings, and then Napoleon III decided that enough with barricades and just demolished a bunch of stuff and made these wide, open streets that,
Exactly. That's the how.
These days. And the only reason is so that people wouldn't go out and build barricades again, because it was like Sacre Bleu, Tuesday, barricades now.
Yeah, he didn't. It was so ironic. It was so ironic. He got his comeuppance, right? Because he wanted to protect himself from the so-called mob of Paris, but he was fighting the previous war, and instead he ended up making these wide boulevards so that when the Germans came knocking, it's like, oh yes, thank you very much, and they could, just surround the city, and they surrendered to the Prussians in 1871. But another city that did this is one that you've been to. That one of the most interesting 19th century redevelopments was Barcelona, and I was very much looking forward to hearing your reactions on what I was telling you on Twitter was what I call one of the capitals of interesting architecture. What were?
It was weird. I'm a fan of Gaudi at this point. It seems weird. We went to the park. I love the cathedral. The big one.
Sagrada Familia?
The Sagrada Familia, yeah. Yeah, it's really painfully expensive to get there, by the way, and experience the architecture there. The tickets to get inside Sagrada Familia, plus the Gaudi, the park, the one that he built a lot of buildings in, it costs 50 euros per person.
Wow. Yeah.
To get into both things, which is expensive for a park and a cathedral. But a cathedral is excellent inside. It really does look like a forest, and I highly recommend you visit. But you have to take it in. You have to look at the glass work and how the lights touch the whole columns inside and everything. And Barcelona, well, the thing is, they also have an Arc of Triumph, which isn't there to and everything. It's very complex because, again, these Gaudi's style is, as my girlfriend said, reminiscent of these gingerbread houses with a thick layer of kind of coating on top of them.
Oh, I'm looking at that triumphal arch in Barcelona right now. It's unique.
No, that's not Gaudi.
It's older.
That's just Triumphal Arch, which is built there for World Stage. Yeah, but Gaudi's stuff is in the park. Everything is very much lacquered a lot. It really looks like a gingerbread house with a thick layer of the frosting. Yes, that's the name. Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned both these things, and this. I had not known about this, the Arco del Triunfo de Barcelona. I had not been aware of that. It's pretty darn interesting looking. It is really, it does have that frosting wedding cake type feel. It's earlier than Art Nouveau, and it's done kind of, it's like a medieval revival type thing, and it's done in red brick.
I was told they built this for the World Exhibition Fair.
Oh, right.
And then they just put it there. It was just interesting.
Wait a minute. The Barcelona, when do you know what year that exhibition was?
I do not, and I will now check. World Fair Barcelona.
It would have been after.
Sounds of Googling intensified. 1920. No, wait, 1888. This was built for 1888.
The 1888 exhibition. Okay, that makes sense, because that would have been in the middle of the École des Beaux-Arts style period, but this would have been a particularly Spanish spin on it.
One thing that I noticed, by the way, is how Madrid and Barcelona look completely different.
Oh yes, what's Catalonian, and they speak differently too.
Yeah, people who maybe don't know, and also to my Latvian listeners, because we have our own regional thing. We have Latvian, and then we have Latgalian. It's a dialect, but it's very close to being its own language. However, Catalan is actually closer to French than Spanish. It's just completely different.
That's interesting.
Absolutely there. And if you're in Barcelona, you see like things written. They have some common words there, but a lot of words that they use for everyday things are totally dissimilar among each other. Catalan is not a dialect of Spanish. Catalan is truly unique.
I've heard that people say, yeah, it's not an accent; it's a separate language.
It is, and it was just interesting about all this stuff. But in Madrid, you can feel the Habsburg influences, a lot of this Austrian thing, with the style and everything. In Barcelona, yeah, it's truly Catalan on its own. By the way, Camp Nou is being demolished and rebuilt soon. The famous soccer stadium.
Well, I didn't know about that. I love stadium architecture, particularly baseball stadiums. I've always wanted, since I was 10, I've wanted to make a baseball stadium.
What? Seriously?
What is this one called?
Camp Nou. That's a soccer one. That's a very famous one. The FC Barcelona club, where Messi used to play for many, many years, is going to be renovated and demolished everything. But yeah, interestingly enough, while we're at it, we're already talking about all sorts of things. Sports architecture, these stadium buildings purpose-built for, activities like baseball stadium or football stadium, they are always interesting enough, except, it's a different approach where you have to put in many people.
Yeah, and it's, again, we were talking, I think this is a theme that's been coming up, is that there's always some type of national or local character that goes into the particularness of something, whether it's a bridge,
yes,
whether it's these neighborhoods, and the idea, and you were talking about how the architecture was consciously reflecting the nationalist feeling and the striving for independence in late imperial Latvia.
Let me just pause here. This is why I don't exactly like Soviet architecture, because the universal usage of these Khrushchevkas, these blockhouses throughout all of the Soviet Union and all the Eastern Bloc, I think in a way that was also an attempt to kind of unify everything and
deliberately
demolish these differences between our cultures. Deliberately, yes, and it is kind of sad to go and see, when people come to me from the Eastern Bloc countries, everyone knows these things, and they were very practical. They had a lot of living space in them. A lot of people could live there. They solved their thing. Block houses like these Khrushchevkas are a very efficient city planning instrument. They're better than skyscrapers, definitely, when it comes to efficiently using space. However,
sure.
And this, by the way, is a small critique of a little YouTube channel that I watch. The guy's from Hungary and now he lives in Prague, but he always says blockhouses are the best. I disagree, because blockhouses were intentionally built everywhere so that,
Is this Adam something?
Yeah, that guy.
Oh, he's interesting.
He is interesting. I mean, he has a lot of good ideas, but when it comes to blockhouses, he misses the argument that buildings are not built just to, be practical. They're built for other things.
I would agree with you there. When Louis Sullivan said form ever follows function, the modernists misinterpreted him by thinking that he meant strict utilitarianism. Ornament is a function. It's a function of feeling. It's a function of directing your attention. It's a function, Sullivan would have said, of spiritual feeling and expression. That to somehow believe, and you can understand that if someone is some type of communist atheist or even some type of internationalist industrial American atheist, because we also get these horrible puke houses and apartment blocks in the United States. It had to do with the industrial era, I think. And yes, it definitely tried to erase particular local identity. It tried to emphasize this universalizing, which often, there are ways that we all have things in common, and then there are ways in which it's just erasing good things, and you should let stuff be different.
The thing is that stuff should be different, because when you grow up in a city or in a place, right, you have this certain feel for it. Architecture forms the zeitgeist of when you grow up and how the whole
very much
universe around you exists. It gives you a certain feel. And if, for example, you grew up only among these Khrushchevkas and blockhouses, I don't know if that could inspire you or something. That's how we create more depressed people. That's how we create more people who are bored.
Well, you do create more depressed people that way. There are studies about this. Christopher Alexander wrote about this in some of his books. They're citing the actual psychological studies that living in tall buildings makes people crazy. There's a thing to this. But the thing that baseball stadiums, I think, specifically
Yeah, let's go back to sports things.
Yeah,
I want to talk about that. Yes.
Specifically, baseball stadiums have learned, and I found this out, a fun guy on Twitter, Howard Blackson, he lives in San Diego, he posted something somebody else wrote about how Major League Baseball is now putting these kind of new urbanist, you call it, things that you should build a wonderful, beautiful baseball stadium that integrates with the neighborhood, and pushing away this kind of concrete, bland, you could call it Soviet style or American international style brutalism, that we're not doing that anymore. Why? Because if you go over across 3 generations, the stuff that's junk and looks bad, it may be efficient, it may be fast, it may be cheap in some ways, but in the long run, not even in the long run, in the medium run, people don't like it, people feel bad, it gets torn down because nobody cares. You build something, you want something that's really sustainable, cathedrals in France. Look how long those have lasted. They're beautiful, and that's what people love them.
Talking about ugly stuff, I just want to bring it back to Riga. Google up Museum of the Occupation of Latvia, and I will tell you about the greatest public shame that we have here. I don't even know why this thing exists. Well, I know why the building exists and everything. Just Google up and click on images.
Museum of the Oh, yeah, it's...
Do you see the building with 2 parts, one being the black cube?
Is that a raw copper facade?
Let me tell you what happened here. It used to be only the black part of this image that you see. It's, by the way, on the Latvia Travel. I hope you opened that one up. It's a 2-part building. One of them is black, other part is white. I hope you've opened that one up.
Okay.
Basically, the left part, which was black, was built there first and was built in black in the 90s to symbolize our oppression. It was meant to look depressing. And then, as time passed and we uncovered more documents, there needed to be more space in it, and parts of the museum were moved, for example, to the KGB Center, and they wanted to build something that would represent our bright future, that we've joined the EU and that we're progressive. So they decided to build the white stuff from just bricks there and put it there next to it. So now we have a black box, white box, and they don't even match up. Yeah. And I can tell you, there were like 35 architects wrote a letter protesting against this, because this is in the middle of our old town. And if
I can see why.
This is the middle of the old town as well. And it's like, I think this is a case of stupid nepotism where one project won, and we probably think it's because of kickbacks or something from the old parliament or whatever. But this is awful. It was awful when it was the black box, but at least it made sense. But building a nice little concrete block thing that is white right next to it, yeah. Like I said, a bunch of architects just signed the fact that, look, if you want to build something interesting, they could have made it from glass and made an interesting addition like they do in the Netherlands or something. Just anything but another box that is just white.
I can tell you what I would have done.
Oh, yeah.
I would have done something where you can, like you said, I would go with what you said with glass and have so there's copper, there's dark patina copper with a little bit of green. And even though it's kind of brutal modernist, there's still some prettiness to it on the old part. And what you do is you have you can think of Art Nouveau if you want, and think about how you have glass with the copper lacing its way through it. And almost looking like it's growing and growing towards the future. It's like they could have done something great.
They could have added on. Then again, structurally, it would be pretty bad if they added on top of it. I don't know, weird. But again, baseball stadiums, not all the sports stadiums, because I just wanted to mention this because this is currently the thing why I hate going through the old town at this point.
Yeah.
Because and Latvian National Library.
Sure.
Then we'll get to the stadiums. I promise you. Latvian National Library is a thing that people hate with passion because how it looks like. Some people love it, especially tourists, but it's one of those very polarizing things. It was built, Latvian National Library is a new project that's built on the opposite side from our old center where they can experiment with everything. But it's supposed to be a reference to one of our traditional literary works by our most kind of important poet, Rainis, who's a writer, and he spoke about the Palace of Light. That is supposed to remind you a Palace of Light.
Not exactly. To me, it reminds me of the Berlin Opera crossed with a ski jump.
The ski jump is an analogy. And mind you, kids, when it's winter and there's snow on top, some of them sneak up and actually use their sled to drive down.
Oh, they actually do?
Yeah, and then they're getting in trouble.
Oh, man. Is that fantastically dangerous that if they get off the side or something?
Of course, yes. Yes. This is where NATO summits are held. Again, I personally think it looks like someone took a piece of liquid glass and just plopped it there, and then it's solidified, and now it's this.
Well, there was a whole fad in the late 90s up till, I don't know, 2010-ish. There was a whole big deal about architecture that looked like either melted, broken glass or melted stuff. And
this was built in, I think, 2012 or something.
That was right in the middle of all that, yeah.
Oh,
and
no.
But there's a symptom broader that oftentimes I push against this. I try to not do this, is that people will tend to make architecture as if buildings are for thinking about instead of living in.
Oh, yeah.
And I like to do the living in part.
Living in part is nice, but, living in part, and this is what I have learned from my city builder friends. Living in part does not include just the look of the house and everything in itself. It also includes how you plan your rooms, where the sunlight goes in, and at which times of the day the sunlight goes in, and also the living space around your house. It's all important.
Well, absolutely correct. Oh, that's part of the real fun part. Yeah.
I have this weird situation in my recording room when I get sunlight in the middle of the day when I'm usually working. So I have to close down my curtains and turn on lights. And my bedroom gets light super early in the morning, which I like. But my main living room gets light super early in the morning and then doesn't. So for the most part, I have to spend way more electricity than I should. It's just weird, interesting decisions. But then again, this house was built in a time where electricity wasn't as widespread right now. And maybe at that point, 1904, we had electricity already, but probably it's like one of those new things which probably the architect did not think about maybe that much.
Maybe not, or there may have been other factors as well. And are you on a first floor or it's upper?
I am on the third floor.
On the third floor. Right.
It's a 6-story building. I will now take a screenshot of this. That will be the building that I live in. That's the National Romanticism style. I live on the third floor of this.
There's the facade. Oh yeah, that's kind of nice. That's like a typical late 19th century, maybe early 20th century, vaguely neoclassical. What year?
1904. Yes.
Yeah, makes sense.
Interestingly enough, this is one thing that I tell to everyone. Do you know how much rent costs here for me?
No idea.
450 euros plus bills for a 3-room apartment.
That's fantastically good, and from my perspective, wow.
It is, and it's just why I always recommend that if you are a student, if you're from America, go and live somewhere like, I don't know, come to our parts in Eastern Europe. We have a bunch of educational programs in English. You will have to pay probably, at least here, but you'll have to pay everywhere because you're not a citizen. However, for your cost of getting a bachelor's here and experiencing another country for 3 years, and living here and all this stuff, that will cost you about as much as a single semester in the United States, and you will not have that.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've heard terrible rumors that I think are probably, unfortunately, true to a great extent. Is that UCLA students commute in and stay at their parents on the weekends, and then stay overnight in a car, which is because things are so expensive. Like every home expansion I build, every new house that I build, I know it doesn't solve everything, but it's like adding a drop to the bucket. When you add to the supply of the housing, that helps make things more affordable for everybody. And that's one of the things I'm motivated by, because we just we got more people. We need more housing. But you wanted to get
baseball stadiums. What is the baseball stadium thing? Because I know they're supposed to be on different sizes even.
Oh yeah, different. It's one of the beautiful things about baseball is that there is no strict size to the field itself. It's kind of unique about baseball like that, because the outfield was originally, when they started playing baseball, it was just kind of there was no boundary all that much. But when they started having stands, that's when the idea of the home run came up, that instead of being like a ground rule double, if you hit the ball far enough that it would just kind of went so far, and to this day, if a ball bounces on the field and then goes out of the stands, you go to second base. You don't get a home run. It's because the baseball stadiums were built as parks in cities. That's Chicago's city motto, urbs in horto, city in a garden. And that's what makes them, one of the things that makes them so beautiful and wonderful, especially the old ones, is that you're in the middle of the city. The first baseball stadium I went to, my dad took me to Old Comiskey Park. I was 5 years old. I go up the ramp. He points at, and I swear this is the start of my interest in architecture. My dad points at that and says, "Look, David, that's called a Romanesque arch." was like, wow. And I walk through it, and it gets all dark. You have this huge grand facade, and you walk in, everything's dark, your eyes adjust, and then you go up this ramp, and you just see green in the fields and the seats, and there are those famous guys, and you can see them play baseball in person, and it's so awesome. It's just such a great thing. But the way that the outfields were shaped had to do with the size and shape of the city block and the way you pointed the stadiums. And then it got to be a little bit fun and strategic, because the parks that were bigger would hire a lot of great pitchers. The parks that were smaller would hire a lot of great hitters. And it's a whole, baseball has its own culture of stadium in some great ways.
Yeah, that's interesting, because football stadiums, they also are different. I think soccer stadiums, the first thing that comes to your mind is probably Wembley, the United Kingdom's Olympic one that they use for all the games. But I want to talk about another one. You were in Peru, but I think one of the most famous stadiums in soccer, world soccer, again, I hate the mix up between these two words, is the one in Buenos Aires, where Boca Juniors team plays in. They're called Bombonera, or the Chocolate Box. It's an amazing stadium. It's built inside of a block, and it's like the minimum allowed size of a football stadium. You can't do anything else there. And
I'm looking at a picture of this. This one's interesting.
It's built super tall. And apparently it has also these railings in front of it, because all the stands are so high up. And apparently they have a saying about this, the Bombonera does not breathe, it beats. Because there's a tradition, when the home team scores a goal, all the fans would just fall forward towards the railing and basically shake the whole thing.
Well, that must be an amazing experience. You actually literally feel the excitement, right?
Yeah, I watched a documentary about this. Yeah, this is interesting, because all this stuff, again, this is form as function. You know, they had a thing, they built this for the function, and then it switches meanings. Just like with many things in art and everything, really, you can envision a use of something, and then someone was going to use it the other way and get a whole different meaning from it, I think.
For anyone who hasn't looked that up yet, it's a very interesting stadium. It's really packed against the street. Like Christoph said, it's tall with many upper decks, and it's shaped like a U. It's shaped like a big U with a flat bit on the other side.
Yeah, it's just all sorts of weird elements. Oh, I want to get back to some bad architecture, because that's funny. Bad architecture is always funny for a bit. Then we have our new projects envisioned by the Nova Rich of these days, the ultra wealthy. Have you heard of the linear city in Saudi Arabia?
Oh, yes, I've had some.
Yes.
I just posted a Canadian joke about that because of another guy's Canadian joke.
Please tell us the joke.
Okay, so this guy. See if I can pull this off, because humor spoken is different from humor Twitter. But so this guy, who he has other Twitter stuff that his family came from Saudi Arabia, so he has fun talking about Saudi Arabia and Canada. He's a guy who grew up in Canada, and he posts something about all you urban planners, you talk and complain about the line in Saudi Arabia, like they're building the city, a long narrow strip of a city in between walls in a desert or something. You all complain about the line, but Toronto actually built it. LOL. And he shows a shot from an airplane when he's coming home to Toronto of big skyscrapers along a straight street. So what I did is I posted something from the movie Strange Brew with Rick Moranis and that one other guy, Dave Thomas, I think. And so, you know, they're the guys who talk like this. Oh, the influenced Wayne's World, eh? And so it says, oh, look at that. But you know, they built a line in Canada, but they built it right next to the big old lake, eh? Oh, maybe we should mail that to Saudi Arabia, help them out a bit, yeah? Oh, you hoser. But it's because the thing is, it's like,
ladies and gentlemen, we have an art historian talking in funny accents here on this show. Eastern border levels of insanity reached. I love this. You have to make fun of things, because otherwise you'll just go insane in today's world.
Absolutely, but it's I grew up in Wisconsin, so it's like a thing for me to understand about the. I feel him about the Canadian thing, but the absurdity of it, the absurdity of building this long straight thing in the desert where there's no water,
and it's multi-leveled, and it's straight in a line. There's a reason why cities aren't in a line. That's called, radial stuff, right? Lines are not efficient, and you can't get any. There is no green space at all.
Well, yeah, right. There really couldn't be. It doesn't make sense. What are you going to do? You're going to have,
And someone's going to build it.
you're going to have like Augusta National Golf Course from Arizona, but have it in Saudi Arabia. They have stuff like that, but it's a trade-off. It's like how much people's water do you want to use for that?
It's just like sometimes it kind of feels people are just weird.
We're talking about the nepotism earlier, and we got way too much of that in politics and everything. It's intensified in the past like 20 years. It's intensified. But the whole thing about this, especially with things like Elon Musk's Hyperloop, Adam something goes off on that eloquently. I don't have to repeat his thing, but there's a lot.
Yes, and on that part, I agree with him. By the way.
The thing about the line is that you're wondering if some of the people planning this know it's not going to work, but they're just happy to accept the grant money and the investment.
Absolutely. Like we have a bridge in Riga that was built through our most corrupt era, and I think that's the most expensive bridge per square meter on planet Earth at this point due to kickbacks. It's so stupid. Again, bridges. We always come back to bridges somehow. One thing, though, that I want to ask you, one thing that the Soviets did, and I don't think it's anywhere else, it's just the Soviet Union, when they rebuilt the city centers and everything, they always planned streets in the central parts where things could go through to be as wide so that tanks could just mow through them. It was built for military purposes, which is why if you've been to Prague, you probably also have noticed this, unless they've changed this, because that was also an Eastern Bloc country. We have a lot of stupid tunnels placed in places with a lot of people going through these underground passageways. They put the cars up and made the people go down and below everything, even when it wasn't happening there. And I've been told that this is a bad city planning. Well, it's bad because it's like stairways down and it's uncomfortable to some people, I suppose. But people have complained to me a lot about the fact that we have these underground passages, which are very blocky and I don't know, maybe poorly constructed.
Like underpasses. I've been to both Prague and Budapest, and I noticed these even more prominently in Budapest. You're talking about underpasses below wide streets?
Yes. Wide streets are there because of tank.
I got mixed feelings about those. I really have mixed feelings about those because it is pretty not I'll put it this way. It's hard to make it pleasant. New York has those in some areas of Manhattan. And they don't. Chicago tried to make a whole underground, the Chicago Pedway. They did it in the 50s and 60s. It didn't work. Montreal, Canada, talk about Canada again. Canada has them, but that's because it's ultra cold for like a whole fifth of the year.
By the way, Kiev takes underground passes to a whole new level. I think it was either the world's deepest metro or Europe's deepest metro system. It's just super deep. And they love their underground stuff. There is, in like a city center, from the Khreshchatyk, where the whole Maidan Square is located, to around the surrounding parts. If you just walk one level down, then it's just connected by a huge mall with tons of tiny little shops. It's a whole shopping center underground.
Right.
Which is why, by the way, where people used to hide, obviously, when the bombings happened. But they love their underground things, like to a ridiculous degree.
I'm wondering, there's a bit in Boston, in the Boston area, I should say, it's out past Cambridge, where the subway goes way, way down because they had to get below a clay deposit. And it would have been super expensive to tunnel through the clay, and they would have had maintenance issues on the subway tunnel. I'm wondering if with all that wonderful Ukrainian black soil, that if they had to go super deep, I'm wondering why they went super deep. And I don't know. Maybe it's because they had to get below that black soil to actually get to some good bedrock or something.
Possibly, yes. See, this is the thing. I never even thought about the materials and the construction process of this. Yeah, it would make sense. Also, it was ridiculously cheap when I was there, when it was running. Now, during the war, Metro doesn't run. But when I was there in 2018, it was about, it was 17 hryvnia per ride, maybe even less. It was basically somewhere around 8 cents per ride in Kiev Metro.
Oh, that's weirdly low. That's like, it's almost symbolic what they charge you.
It was like just weird as well. But yeah, kind of, I have to go get my drone back from the roof, which I'll film with another drone, like we spoke.
Of course.
But I want to ask you one more important thing. Could you please tell me, because this has been, I hope, an interesting conversation about architecture, its meaning, Riga, Soviet Union, all this stuff. And I wanted to ask you, can you name me one example of what you consider the best, most precisely kind of zeitgeist influencing building, the best architectural example and the worst one that you know, and the best one that you know?
Okay, the best one.
I know it's hard. This is torture for you. This is why I picked it. No one gets to leave the eastern border happy.
So this is yes. So the interior. Well, there are 4 lights. Oh, okay. Now, I'll answer the question. The best, I would have to say. Okay, I'm just going to go with my gut for the best, and I'm going to say the Dana. The Dana House by Frank Lloyd Wright in Springfield, Illinois. It's not his most famous house. The Roby House is, for very good reason. And I love his stuff out in LA that looks like Mayan temples and looks like Daenerys Targaryens.
How do you spell it? I need to Google it up, obviously.
Dana. It's like a woman. It's named after
Dena, right?
Dana, and it was. I think this was this woman's last name instead of her first name, but it's the Dana House, and it has this amazing. It's got a pitched roof. It's a prairie house, and it has the most fantastic. I've been there. The interior is amazing. The exterior is good. It's got these green tiles.
Oh yeah, I found it. I think.
It's got this horseshoe arch door. It's Dana-Thomas because that was her hyphenated last name. Dana-Thomas House.
Oh yeah, it's excellent.
And it's beige. It's cream brick, probably made in Milwaukee. Milwaukee cream brick with this copper green roof and then green tile. And take a look at the interior too. The interior has this sense of interlocking, amazing space with changes of levels. It's fantastic.
I love how is it really copper? Is it
on the outside? Oh,
yeah.
Sure. That's copper. It's like the Statue of Liberty. It's turned green over time.
The aged copper, when it turns green, it always has some special impact on it. It makes it feel. At the same time, it shows the age of it, but it also shows kind of this intimate feel, the greenness of it, and and obviously you learn at school what it is, but this is a very pleasant color and kind of shows it adds more majestic situation because you always associate it with these monuments, everything together with it. Oh, and the interior is just, wow. Okay, yeah.
It's glorious.
As I'm looking at it, it reminds me of some Oriental influences as well. Something Japanese there.
Oh, greatly. He loved Japanese stuff. He loved Japanese painting and art. Oh, he was highly influenced by Japanese architecture.
And that was Frank Lloyd Wright?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then.
Yeah, and the worst. I'm trying to think of the worst building ever. Let's see. The worst building ever. It's probably. Do I want to rag on Peter Eisenman? It's too easy to rag on Peter Eisenman. But maybe I want to rag on Daniel Liebeskind. Either one of those two. Oh no! I know it. I know what it is. Well, it is. It's Frank Gehry's thingy. Frank Gehry's building that he replaced I think it was building 20. There was this great, wonderful building that Stuart Brand wrote about this in his
Frank Gehry building. The guy who built Walt Disney Hall.
Yep. And now Frank Gehry has done some things that Millennium Park in Chicago Frank did, I think is nice. Okay?
Yeah.
But
okay, I'm just trying to Google this. So what should I Google?
Oh, if you do Frank Gehry MIT, it'll come up. And he said about this, they put it on the site of this wonderful legendary building that, like in the movie Real Genius, where the girl that the guy has the love interest and he finally gets the courage to ask her out on the date and she's sanding the floor. That was inspired. That funny moment was inspired by this glorious old building that they tore down. And then Frank Gehry builds this monstrosity, and for whatever reason, he said, I wanted the facade to look as if it were a swarm of bees.
I'm staring at this now, and I'm like, okay, twisted buildings. I've seen that in Netherlands, done well. But then there's also this pyramid, and then there's this yellow thing, and
it's awful. It's that building. That building caused the miscarriage, and that's what the woman said to me.
This building is genuinely confusing, and it's kind of. The only thing that I could appreciate is the part where the like cubist influenced building things put in there, but there's a tiny little problem with putting such short edges and putting like these broken buildings inside of a building. How do people would live there, and how an office space would look if you had like this very short little tiny spiky corner?
Oh, it feels. Well, you're talking about how ceiling height level makes it feel. Yeah, you live in one of these places, and it's like, ugh. It feels bad, man.
Yeah, the worst part still is the metallic boat-looking thing in the middle, and then there's this yellow thing out of nowhere, and the colors are I will put this. I will generally put this as the image for the whole episode.
Okay.
This is happening. People need to see it, even if you don't Google it. But wow.
Maybe you can.
Anyway,
maybe you can put Frank next to it just to give people hope for the world. But yeah.
Oh wow.
Architecture matters.
This has been amazing. You truly made my day better. And
wonderful.
You know what? I want to come on your show and talk about this stuff more because I have to be focused about the war stuff. Sadly I can't do breather episodes all the time, but I would be more than glad to come on your show and discuss architecture and art in general, because we never even touched other art besides this and other things. I'd be happy to, because I've had so much fun and learned a lot of things too. So hey, sorry, I just really have to go, and we're ending this conversation, and I'm not kidding here. This is not 3 takes. This is literally because I have to go to grab my friend who has a Ukrainian military drone that she builds to pick up my drone from a building's roof. Because stupidity.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is actually rescuing his drone, Mr. T style. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'll actually try a video of this. Anyway, thank you for this, and it was amazing, and please message me. I am now genuinely interested in coming to your show and talking about whatever you want to talk about. And please tell us all your links and plug your show before I say the famous words at the end of this.
Oh, sure thing. And thank you so much. I had a great time. Definitely, there's much more fun, excellent we can talk about. I'm looking forward to it. So yeah, my name is David Getzen. Thank you for listening. This was so much fun. The business and all about me, livingprocess.net. I'm Living Process on YouTube, Getzin, and also at Histofarch, HISTOFARCH on Twitter.
Thank you. And everyone go check it out. And yeah, this building, once you see it, I don't even know. At any rate, до свидания, товарищ. And remember, happiness is mandatory. And once you look at the MIT building thingy, oh boy, yeah, this will be harsh for you.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Border Show. If you have any questions or comments, go to our website, theeasternborder.lv, and leave a comment there. Or email us at theeasternborder@gmail.com. We'll be sure to answer. You can also follow us on social media and contact us there. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. It really helps us grow the show. And remember, happiness is mandatory.